Hello, Patriots. How are you today? Give yourself a hand. As many of you may have heard me speak before, you know I'm not a professional speaker, and I like to give that disclaimer up front. My beautiful wife, Tammy, she said, honey, you really don't need to do that. And it warmed my heart. I said, that's so nice. She said, they'll figure it out by the end. And, you know, before I get started here, I do want to ask you to join me in wishing Florida Supreme Court Justices Perry and Labarga a long and healthy life in private practice. Yeah, because we're voting no because you need to go. You know, isn't it incredible that despite all the historical evidence to the contrary, that anyone can still believe that the founders would have fought a long, cruel, and bloody war just to exchange one central, overpowering government for another? And yet these guys like Justice Perry and Labarga, sit there and they want to define the limits of our freedom for the extension of greater government control. That is not the founders' legacy. That's not why we're here today, is it? You know, for these out-of-touch elitists, the Bill of Rights to them, it's a historical curiosity now. It's just quaint. Doesn't mean anything. But we know that the Bill of Rights is the very essence of state sovereignty. That's why it was created. And that wasn't lost on the founders. In fact, at the North Carolina Convention, the great man Samuel Spencer, he says, it appears to me that the state governments are not sufficiently secured and that they may be swallowed up by the great mass of powers given to Congress. Was that prophetic? Look what we have today. Oliver Ellsworth from Connecticut, a Connecticut Yankee. You know, they talk about nullification being based in the South. This is a Connecticut Yankee. He says, the United States are sovereign on their side of the line, dividing jurisdictions. The states on the other. Each ought to have the power to defend their respective jurisdictions. Could it be any clearer than that? And another one of our Yankee brethren, Mr. Williams, says, are not the terms common defense and general welfare indefinite, undefinable terms? What checks have the state governments against such encroachments? And that's the question we're facing again today. What checks do the states have against such encroachments? Because the encroachments are out there. And they're in our face every day. And they're in our face greater every day, from real ID to health care. We don't need 14 or 16,000 additional federal snooper troopers getting in our business in the sovereign state of Florida. Clearly, the 10th Amendment was never conceived to be a throwaway or quaint relic. Its necessity and creation was brought about by a clear and deliberate decision by people who stingily, I'm telling you, stingily ceded their sovereign authority to this limited powers agent that they were creating. And for us here today, this is a hallmark day for liberty. Because on this 10th day of the 10th month of the 10th year of our young century, we gather to celebrate rather than denigrate the 10th Amendment. Give that. That's right. And all of us, you know, we've all probably taken different roads to get here today, obviously geographically, and for many of us, ideologically as well. But your 10th Amendment decision today, to this point, was to come here, to participate, to learn, and enjoy. For the Florida 10th Amendment Center, the decision, our 10th Amendment decision, came about not quite 11 months ago when Mike Bolden and Bryce Shanka decided that they wanted to create a Florida chapter. And since then, in that short period of time, we've got chapters in Pensacola, Jacksonville, Sarasota, and most recently Palm Beach. And those chapter leaders, Benita Colley in Pensacola, Jamie Davis in Jacksonville, Steve Aiken in Sarasota, and Ron Skipper in Palm Beach, each one of them brings their own special talent and their own special strengths to the organization. But the message, the all-important message, is always constant always clear, we're never going to waver from it, and that's the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. It doesn't get any clearer. In 2011, we plan to continue our message and the mission by working with like-minded organizations, including Campaign for Liberty, the RLC, Floridians Against Real ID, and we're dedicated to the repeal or nullification of unconstitutional legislation that has been illegally imposed upon us by the general government. All of us, including you here today, especially you here today, need to work so we can implement simple steps of diligence, not great strides every day, but simple steps of diligence to reclaim the home country sovereignty. And these should include, but not be limited to, the promotion of state sovereignty legislation, including the nullification of unlawful general government acts. And when we talk about legislation to push back the general government leviathan, when we talk about healthcare freedom acts and we talk about the Firearm Freedom Act, we need to go further than just say Floridians are not going to participate in this. We need to say, when you send your federal agents here to try and overturn sovereign state law, our constitutional sheriffs are going to put them in jail, and you can come and pay their fine and get them out. At the end of the revolution, the states were 13 free and independent countries, and they created that limited powers government to exercise those things they felt could be better done at a central location. But never in anything I can read, letters, diaries, you name it, never could I find anything that the desire was to be anything but to continue to be free and independent. We're members of a voluntary compact. We're not slaves to the federal leviathan. The other thing that we have to consider doing is identify sitting members of the legislature who are ready and willing to become champions of liberty. And we have to identify and promote candidates for state office to replace those sitting members of the legislature who are not ready and willing to become champions of liberty. In our home country today, both sovereignty and solvency are in peril. It's no secret, you see it every day in the headlines. But sovereignty's betrayal for solvency's temporary relief is always on the table between D.C. and Tallahassee. And it's you and me and the rest of us. We have to be the obstacles to that short sail of freedom. If we don't do it, who will? If not us, who? If not today, when? Using fair but firm insistence and pressure, we must remind Tallahassee of the 10th Amendment decision we require of them. For every unlawful general government imposition, a home country interposition. We are not going to be slaves to illegal legislation. It's up to us to remind Tallahassee of Madison's warning that encroachments by the central government must excite the legislatures to watchfulness and impose upon them the strongest obligation, and that is to preserve unimpaired the line of partition. That line is blurred and hardly exists anymore. So today on 10-10-10, let's make up our minds. No longer are we going to accept grassroots buzzwords from politicians in place of results. Starting today, let us be real clear to those in Tallahassee to whom we've given our consent to govern. We will no longer accept general government theft of our liberties. No longer will we stand by quietly while our pockets are picked by political parties to fund the perpetual welfare warfare state. No longer will we tolerate a vast nationalist state that has become aggressive abroad and despotic at home and has decided that the limits of its own power is no limits at all. Here in this room today, we're contemporary tenters, but we stand in the shadows of those original tenters. Richard Henry Lee, George Mason, Elbridge Gerry, James Monroe, and Thomas Jefferson, and others. And we stand in good company. But if they were here, would they ask us, what have you done with your inheritance? What have you done to our legacy? It's up to us today to answer that by humbly accepting that responsibility to restore sovereignty, restore the founders' federalism, and above all, to be free once again. Thank you for listening. God save the Republic.